Mahdi Abdelaziz from Web to do his presentation. Şimdi sahneye Mahdi Abdelaziz'i sunumunu yapmak üzere davet ediyorum.
All right. Good morning. How was your day so far? Up? Bad? Good? Awesome. So welcome to DevFest. I hope you are enjoying the DevFest so far. And today my presentation is going to be about offline first. So first to introduce myself, my name is Mahdi Abdelaziz. I work for Vaadin, and Vaadin is basically a UI framework for Java developers. How many of you heard about Vaadin before? Okay, not bad. So 25% of the audience, which is good. But today, actually, my presentation is more about something different, about technology. First of all, let's go back in time, probably 6 or 7 years ago, when we were discussing with our bosses about the importance of moving a desktop application to the cloud. Luckily, nowadays, we really don't need to do that. Everyone now understands the importance of having web application on the cloud. That's something obvious for all enterprises. And what we are seeing right now happening is everyone is asking for mobile applications. So if you have a web application, that's probably not enough. You need to also have it available on mobile devices. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. Actually, this is a little bit old statistics, but it shows that the number of users accessing internet from mobile devices increases and exceeded the number coming from desktop. You are all developers, right? How many of you are developers? Okay, the majority are developers. I suppose the rest are designers or video producers or something like that. And these statistics actually makes me wonder, how come people are increasingly accessing internet from mobile devices? And when I look at myself, at my work, I am having in my work a big screen. I rely on heavy IDE like photo editor or IDE for code editor. I have to have a heavy processor. I cannot just use a tablet device or something like that. And moreover, I must have reliable high-speed internet. And most of you are having the same thing. So most of you really need to have a laptop or a computer to be able to produce your daily productivity. So how come people are increasingly accessing internet from mobile devices? The answer is because myself, most of you are something called content producers. A content producer is a person who most of his time is spent on a laptop because he's producing content for other people to use. He's producing web applications, he's producing mobile applications, he's producing articles on the internet, videos, photos, and so on. But when we are thinking about producing such things, we need to think about the target user. Our user is not a technology freak like myself. He really doesn't care much about the latest version of Android and the latest trend in technology. He just cares about using something, having something that is usable. So we need to think about him. In other words, when you are creating your next web application, what is the percentage of audience you want to target? Is it the blue person or the orange person? We at Vaadin, because we are framework people, we actually are targeting the orange part because we target developers. But most probably, when you are creating a web application or any other kind of content, you want to target the vast majority of users. So you need to think about how to use the latest trend in technologies to be able to have wider audience. Actually, many companies made a lot of studies about what's going on, how to start. For example, this comparison done by HP shows that the traditional way of developing web application has been in such a way that you develop an application for desktop device, You have a desktop device, so all your time is thinking about a desktop device and developing for this. And then when you are done, you say, hey, I want to optimize this application for tablet. So you change something, you squeeze it a little bit, you change the size, you remove some features. And then when it's done, you think, hey, I want to make this application available for mobile as well. So again, you start to remove features, squeeze font, do a lot of work. And this process has been proven to be not efficient. Maybe fast at the beginning, but not really efficient. That's why we and many players in the market came up with the mobile-first design, which is telling you, if you start developing, thinking in the mind that you are targeting a mobile device, then you are out of the box targeting tablets and desktop, because anything that run on mobile will work on other devices. And then when you are done, when you have targeted all the devices, you can start adding more features on the tablet and adding more features on the desktop and so on. So this is basically what we call mobile design strategy for your design. And I have my own version of practical test to see how much you produced a mobile design application. So what I just described, the mobile-first strategy, and then the touch-first design. A touch-first design is thinking that your user is actually not having a mouse. He's not going to be able to move the cursor to the corner and click. This is not something that is going to happen. You need to think that your user is actually having a big thumb and he will touch. So you need to give enough space and enough visibility for your components to be able to use them. That's why I came up with my own name, which is called Coffee First Design. So I didn't actually have enough time to search for this, but what is the most famous coffee producer here in Turkey? Starbucks? Yeah, that's what I thought. So basically, when you produce an application, you give it to your tester in one hand, and then give him a cup of coffee on the other hand, and then ask him to use the application, and see how much he will be able to manage to use the whole application without dropping the cup of coffee. So that means that every single feature in your application should be accessible with one thumb. He doesn't need to squeeze on the side. He doesn't need to zoom in, zoom out, open, move closer, move further, and so on. So mobile-first design actually contains a lot of topics, a lot of discussions, but for you today, I selected one specific topic, which is something called offline-first design. Why offline-first design? Because it's the 100% guarantee to have an engaged person all the time. If your application never goes offline, if your application never shows the little cute dinosaur ever, then your application is engaging and people will not stop using it. Actually, this is the first part of my talk about offline first, but what I want to do also is combining this with a new trend called web components. So how many of you heard about web components? Okay, 20% of the people. All right, so web component, briefly, very, very quickly, is a new standard for developing application. And I picked web components especially today because I believe this is the future. So you are building new applications, you are building for the future. You probably should think about using something from the latest trends. Quickly, I will scratch the surface of what is web component. Just definition quickly. Web component consists of 4 concepts. The first concept is called templates, which is basically you define a component inside a separate HTML file. We call it template. And then this component, we can include it inside your main HTML file, which the process, we call it HTML import. And then this component, we can give it a tag name, your custom tag name. So that's what we call custom element. And finally, there is another fun concept called shadow DOM, which is basically, instead of having your template expanded over the DOM tree in your browser, it's going to be available in single one line, just the tags that you defined. So this is basically the motivation behind Web Component. And if you are not familiar with this, then most probably you already used Web Component, because when HTML5 standard has appeared and things like video started to appear, they actually started to implement the Web Component even without telling us. So browser manufacturers implemented this kind of Web Component. If you add a tag called video, for example, source equal and give it a video file, and then open it in the browser, it will show a video. But if you inspect it with your browser inspector, you'll find that it's a bunch of span elements and input elements and div elements and so on. So those kind of elements are basically what we call shadow DOM, and they are included inside the video whenever you include the video tag. So the idea here is basically having modern object-oriented concepts inside the HTML code that you write nowadays, such as encapsulation, inheritance, and so on. Reusability, basically, of components. Luckily, you don't really have to worry about building the components, but at least you need to worry about how to use them, what are the latest trends on how to use them. As I said, they are just a tag that you can add in your HTML file, but unfortunately, not all browsers support them right now, even though it's a standard. But we have here Chrome fully supporting it, and eventually Opera, because Opera is using the same engine as Chrome's. And then we have Firefox partially supporting it. If I would be giving this presentation 2 months ago, Safari would not be listed at all, because they just released the support or partial support for Web Components. And, you know, Internet Explorer, you know. So that's why there is a library called Polyfill, or the concept of Polyfill in general, which allows you to glue the gap between those lack of browser support. So Polyfill is a concept that you can use in your application right now and allows you to use Web Components. So back to my company, Vaden. Actually, as I said, we are a Java framework, right? But we figured out that a lot of people really love our components, but they don't necessarily want to use it under a Java ecosystem. They don't really want to write Java. That's why we decided to extract our freely available open source components and made them available as web components. And you can start using them right now. They are available open source. You can go check them out. So this is a Vaden date picker. If you add it in an HTML file, you will get this. Basically, you will get the blue part on the top. And when you click on the icon, it will pop up a date picker selector. But theoretically, it will work, because practically, you need to also have the include statement, HTML import that I just mentioned. And you also need to have the Polyfill library to be able to overcome the browser compatibility. We have also a bunch of other components, and we thought about making them available actually for Angular people, Polymer, React, and basically any JavaScript framework. How many of you are actually using Java right now for development? Okay, that's a good number. And how many of you are Polymer user? Only the speakers? How many of you are using Angular? Okay, so 50% Angular, 50% Java. And probably you didn't hear about Polymer, but Polymer basically is a library that allows us to create web components. There is a lot of libraries, but we selected Polymers because we thought it's modern and it's supported by Google, and it's nice. But now let's bind the two topics together. So I talked about offline first, and I talked about web components. How to actually get things work together. There is a lot of concepts that you can think about, like, for example, caching, or offline storage, or data replication, and so on. So what are those topics? Caching basically is having your website cached in the browser. That's probably the most straightforward solution that you may come up with. It's easy. And if you are using Polymer, then you can use the Polymer silver elements to perform those kind of caching. But the problem is probably when you are creating a web application, you have some data, you have some database. And you want this data to be able to manipulate it inside your web browser. So your application most probably is not just 2 or 3 pages that you just download in the browser and that's it, right? You want to be able to interact and perform some actions depending on other actions. For example, a view form, and then the data displayed in this form should be retrieved from some kind of data. That's why the idea of offline storage came up. And we have seen a lot of implementations that didn't really go well till recently when we saw a huge rise in Firebase, especially after Google acquired it. Basically, it provides you a nice solution for making a direct replication between the data in the browser, saving and caching a version of the data in the browser, and also having a version on the server. So the concept of data replication is widely known now. And the one that I picked for you today is not actually Firebase, because I know some other people will talk about Firebase today. I actually selected a concept called PouchDB, or a library called PouchDB. PouchDB is a library that basically do the same thing. All you have to do is to implement the CouchDB protocol on your server layer. And basically, when you are online, there is a continuous replication between the server and the browser. And once you go offline, basically, the data will be served from your offline storage, your PouchDB storage. So the idea is simple. PouchDB asks you to have a CouchDB implementation on your server on top of your data layer. You can have a lot of solutions on how to do that. For example, if you are using MySQL database or Oracle database, then you need to implement the protocol on top of that. And then PouchDB, as I'm going to show you in few moments, is going to do the rest of the magic for you. Let's see this in action. So I have here a simple coding application. Probably need to switch my screen. So I have this simple application. Oh, I'm not connected to internet. That's lovely. So should I select the guest or any guest? No? Is there internet here in the room? Yeah. So this demo is basically, yeah, it's recorded right now, so I hope you are typing the correct characters, though. Okay, I need to enter my password. You want to see my password? No, you don't. Okay, now it's connected. Yeah, well, this is before implementation, right? So I think, yeah, now it works. So this was a good example, actually, showing how my application actually didn't work and give a not so cool response showing an unlimited loading because I didn't have internet. And this is what I will try to fix right now. So first of all, I would love to show you how this application looks like. So here, I'm going to open this in Atom. So I have here basically a very simple, one of our components, which is grid, a very simple implementation. Basically, I started by including the Vaadin grid from a CDN and simple styling. And then I have here this line of code which says when HTML imports are done, when ready, basically define a grid. And this code basically, like you can study it later at home, it basically perform lazy loading of data coming from a server inside the grid. This code, I copy it from the online documentation, so nothing fancy here, except of if a table, a data table that is displaying the data inside a grid, and that's it. I have here this helper method that perform a lazy loading mechanism whenever you scroll in the grid, and basically I added the grid component here. All right, so this is the first part. Now, I have here also the history of what I'm gonna do. So instead of typing and showing you boring typing strokes, I'm gonna show you basically what are the modifications that I'm gonna do. So first of all, I will add this simple editor. So can you see the code, or should I? Yeah, I hope now it's good. Yeah, so this is a very simple HTML code, an editor, first name with an input field, last name, email, and so on, and then a button called update. When you click on it, it calls a function called update. And I have defined a selected object here, and then I added to the click listener of the grid. Whenever you click on the grid, I'm changing the value of the input called first name with the first name and last name and email. So filling the form. And finally, when you click on update, when you click on the button update, I'm modifying the object values. So let's see this in action. Internet is a little bit slow, but we're gonna see this later. So basically, when I select an item, it pops up here, it shows up in the editor here. And basically, if I try to modify this, like adding any data, and then click update, nothing happened. Anyone noticed why? Sorry? I did. So I have this function called update, and this function basically updates the variable called selected, but it doesn't do anything in the grid. It doesn't modify the data on the backend. It's just modifying the object inside the memory. But that's just to start. So just to start, I have this editor. Okay? Next step is starting to use CouchDB. So I have here an installation of CouchDB, and it's installed locally. And whenever, well, my screen is a little bit squeezed, but it should appear here somehow. Maybe if I switch to something like this. No, doesn't help. Yeah, now it helps. So you can see here that I have a local installation of CouchDB that is basically serving my data. I'm like simulating a server inside my computer. And then for the coding part, the modifications that I did is basically installed a version of PouchDB locally. For those of you who are experienced with WebComponents and all those kind of things are going to complain why you didn't use Bower or NPM and so on. Basically, I tried to make this demo as simple as possible, so please bear with me, just including the JavaScript file directly inside my HTML code. And then this is the first new line for you, which is basically introducing a new remote database served under an address called localhost/tick. All right? So here, localhost, it says localhost, but let's assume that this localhost is actually my backend server. So this is a remote server, right? So the data is coming from remote DB. And finally, instead of loading the data from the actual server that was loading the data lazily, I'm going to remove this by loading the data from my remote database. So I copied the data from the online server to my CouchDB, and then finally I'm changing the data retrieval mechanism of my grid from the remote server to the remote CouchDB. The code that is written here is very simple mechanism to convert from the data retrieved from CouchDB to a data that grid can understand. This code is basically available open source, so you can revisit and see what's going on here. But I will move on just for the sake of time. And as you can see, I removed the getJSON method that is responsible about the lazy loading. So I'm not using any remote server anymore. I'm all depending on the CouchDB right now. Let's see the results. Basically, there won't be any visual differences, except that now you can see at least that the data is loading very fast. And that's because the data is coming from my remote server that is existing on my laptop. So I don't rely on the internet anymore. If the internet is not working, now I still have the data loaded because it's coming from CouchDB, right? Now, the next step is use local database instead of remote one. So going fully offline. The second magic line defined today is basically local DB. And here, I'm not giving it a remote address. I'm giving it just a name, an identifier. And then PouchDB will automatically understand that this is a database that I want to store inside my browser. It's going to be here, inside Chrome. And instead of loading the data inside the grid from my remote database, I change it all references to remote DB by local DB. So instead of remote DB, I'm using local DB, and so on. So what is the result right now? Again, no visual difference, except that the data is actually need to be replicated at least once. This is what will happen here. And then the next iteration, the data will be actually served from my local storage. Let's see the results. So again, no visual difference, but anyone know how can we test if this actually works offline? Turn off the internet? No. Why turn off the internet won't help? Exactly. So I'm right now, I don't rely on the internet at all. In the previous step, I could have turned off the internet already, but internet here doesn't do anything at all. And you can see this clearly because the data is loaded very fast. If you remember at the beginning, it was taking some time to load, right? But there is another observation, as you said here, which is basically the CouchDB is running locally. So killing the CouchDB is a way to simulate losing the server or being offline, right? So let's see how I can do that. I will go here and quit CouchDB. And then double checking, now it's completely offline, so it doesn't work. And if I refresh here, still the data is working. And if I go here, I still can see the data loaded in the editor. So one more time. The data is available, and I can see it in the editor. So now I'm completely offline. If you want to double check, I can also turn off this, right? Actually, I would rather not turn this off because I'm serving from CDN. So here, I'm serving the script from CDN. This should not be the case. You should serve it from a bower again, but for simplicity, let's keep it like that. But anyway, the idea, I hope you got the idea right now. What I have is data working offline. You can map this on your application when you have multiple views, and those views are loaded based on specific user interaction. For example, the user select a form, select an item. If he is in a shopping cart, for example, and select a specific item, then if you have part of the data already inside your browser, you can display it and you can manipulate it even if you are completely offline. Now, you have a question? Yeah, please go ahead.
What difference if there were to be changes
yeah, that's what I'm going to do right now. So as you can see, all I have done so far is read only. I am copying the data, saving it locally, and even the editor does not work, right? So the next steps that I'm going to do right now is update the data offline. Before looking at the code, what I have to do basically is whenever I receive a data modification happening locally, I need to notify back the server. So this is also done here inside. So I need to expand this a little bit. Inside the update function. So inside the update function, I started to add the first line of code that is basically when you click on update button, it goes to local DB and then put the selected object. And then after that, it asks the grid to refresh items. But this won't work because of something that I'm going to mention at that. But at least the object will be updated. Let's see this in action. So basically, I'm going to go to number 4. Let's take this, for example, modify this to Istanbul, and click update. Nothing happens because the grid did not refresh. But so this is item number 42. If I refresh the page and go to item 42, you'll find that it got modified, even though I'm still offline. Right? So what happened right now is the data has been updated offline. Now, you need one last magic code, which is basically syncing the data between offline and online. So this is the third magic line here. Instead of using replicate, which is a one-way operation, taking from the remote server to the local server, I'm going to use sync. And sync basically says that keep both of them in sync, right? What will happen right now is if I do any modification, it will wait till I go back online, the CouchDB server goes back online, and then the data will be updated. So to see this last step, if I do something like this, and then, for example, modify this to, again, Istanbul. So it's 56, so let's see, item number 56. Here we go. It got updated, and now I'm sure that if I go back to the CouchDB, I'll find the data updated. It's not really important to see this right now. You can test it at home again. But I'm interested to show you one more thing. Any questions? I saw some questions happening here before showing you the next part. Yeah.
What happens if there is conflicting updates?
I'm going to talk about this at the end. Yeah, good question.
So while we're creating the offline application that we're using, so what do we have to do to get the data that we're going to use in the local database from the remote at first point? Because we have to give the user the database or the data somehow at the beginning. So how can we do that?
So basically, one of the ways of doing that is lazily loading the data and storing it offline in the browser. So this is some operations that you can keep on the background. You can ask the web worker to do it for you. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm also going to go back to this. So I will just finish the demo, and then I'll see if I have time to take questions. But yeah, the next part of the demo is actually to show you what other capabilities that you can have with PouchDB, which is basically plugins. So PouchDB is actually a very powerful open source tool. It's, I think, supported by the Apache Foundation, and it also provides you some other plugins that you can add. One of the most interesting one is the find plugin. So again, I'm just adding the script here inside my code, and the find plugin is something similar to select query in database. So searching in a database, I want to find something. To be able to do this, you have to first of all index the specific field that you want to search with. So here I'm indexing the first name. So it means that I can later on perform some specific search on first name. And here for simplicity, I added this extra HTML line of code that says, please enter the first name, and then search field, and when you click on it, it goes to a function called find. The function find is written here. It's basically start to use the find plugin. So I'm finding in local DB. So local DB is my local database. Find in it an item with first name matches the query. Okay, let's see this in action. So I have here the new field. I hope you can see it. So if I search for example, Alice, and click find, you'll see that there are 2 Alices inside my database, and it starts to dump them inside inside the web page. So document.write. Very, very simple search just to show you the functionality. Now, one last thing that I mentioned, which is related to how to update the data actually inside the grid. That actually was a bug that I had to take some time to solve it, which is updating the revision of a selected item. The idea here is CouchDB protocol. Whenever you try to push any new item, it automatically adds a new revision number to it. So it's considered as a new item. It's not updating the already existing item. So let's assume that you have a database, for example, and you have the record number 3. You are using the record number 3, and then modify the data in it, and then save. CouchDB, what it will do is basically create a new instance, a new revision for this item, and it will not modify the original item. That's why I had to explicitly cache the revision version and update it with the actual revision. So overriding the existing revision will basically do the work and update the grid. This is the final application. So basically, let's do a final run. So I'm changing the first name and click update. So you see the updates automatically. Let's change this as well. And then maybe here, change this as well. Okay, now I can search how many people with first name Istanbul, nice name by the way. There are 3 of them. So my CouchDB is offline, the data is loaded, the search is done, the data is displayed in the grid. I have a fully functional application thinking about building an application for offline first, and then when my application is mature enough and ready for production, I can put it online. And because I know that it 100% work offline, I know that it will work perfectly online as well. It 100% work offline, so it will work online as well. Challenges. This approach sounds like very nice and straightforward, but as many of you figure out, there are some challenges. The biggest challenge is the conflict of the data. So, for example, let's assume that I opened the application and then I went offline, and then one of you opened the same application and also went offline. And then both of us started to modify the data offline. Once we go back online, whose data going to be updated? This is actually one of the challenges of this approach. But if you think about it, you will find that this challenge actually exists in all database application. This sounds like obvious. In offline application, this is the biggest challenge. But think about it. This is also happening if 2 people are online and are accessing the same data at the same exact time and trying to modify the data at the same time. Maybe the question here is how often this will happen when you are offline, because people are relying on having the data available all the time. And I don't really have a direct solution for this. This is one of the architecture strategies that you have to take into consideration. PouchDB here, by default, makes something called best guess. It best guesses what would be the update here. Otherwise, you will have to deal with that or take it into consideration when you are architecting such similar application. Another challenge is actually the data storage. So my data storage here sounded like very small and little, and I was doing things on the fly. But think about your database. Your database probably is 500 megs of data or something like that. You don't want to download 500 or 1 gigabyte of data inside the browser of a user. He will really hate you. So this is something that you also need to put into consideration when you are architecting your application. So you need to think about what is the relevant data to this relevant user that you need to download and what data should not be downloaded. Don't download the whole internet once he's opening your application. So this is also another thing that you probably should take into consideration while architecting your application. So I think that was everything for my demo at least. I don't know if I have enough time left, but as I told you, this is basically the link, a GitHub link for the demo applications that I used. Please take a look. Let me know if you have questions on the GitHub. And I don't know, do you have time for questions?
Yeah. 4 minutes.
Okay, 4 questions. Go ahead. Yes, please, go ahead.
Is there a way that the user can hack into the cached data and edit it so the CouchDB will synchronize with the server? So it will be like a security issue if I have the wrong database storage. Like if I have the user's storage in the app or in the browser, it will be a really big problem with that.
Excellent.
So how will be?
Excellent question. So the data is stored inside the browser. How secure it is? That's actually a very excellent question. Luckily, when you are performing something like that, the data is locked to the domain provided by this storage. So basically, the user can see the data only if he's under this domain. If he navigates to another domain or another session or something like that, then the data will not be available. On the other side, if the data is really sensitive and you don't want multiple users to be able to see this specific data, then you most probably want to implement some kind of authentication. And there is a plugin for PouchDB for authentication as well, which is basically encrypting the offline storage so that not even the authorized user can access it. But if the user is logged in, then he can programmatically accessing the data. If he runs some script locally, he can access the data. So you are basically preventing users that are not logged in inside the same website to read this sensitive data, but you are not preventing the actual user who is authenticated on this website to see the data. Okay? Yeah, good question. More good questions, please? Yeah, please go ahead.
Just talk about web applications. How can I manage my offline data in my desktop application?
Desktop application. Well, I was trying actually today to move with the idea that we should not really actually create new desktop applications. So right now, probably it's the best idea to have a web application and mobile application because then it's available anywhere in the world. I was actually going to talk about PWA, which is yet another acronym by Google, but luckily I have amazing speakers that are going to talk about them, so I recommend that you read about that, which is also going to come up with a new magic that the browser will support for you to, I would say, literally make you not need any desktop application after today.
I have already some desktop applications, and I want to manage my data offline.
So I would say probably it's outside the scope of my presentation. And I don't know actually how big the application is. If it's really big, then probably it's hard to migrate. But maybe it's a good idea to think about migration sometime. This is at least my understanding that this is a trend going on right now. Yeah, please go ahead.
When you sync the data from local to the server, can you give any rule to synchronization?
Rule?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
You say when you go from offline to online, you sync the data, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give any rule?
What kind of rule?
Like get the latest data, or take only the name, or just take the names, you know, the column names?
I actually didn't dig that much in that. I don't know. But what I know for sure is the sync command that I showed, or the API that is called sync, is basically going to perform the magic for me. So whatever modification happened offline is going to go to the server.
All right. You know, no, I'm just saying, like, when you get the table from offline to online, just take this table, not the other tables, something like that.
Maybe you can manage that with multiple offline storages. So when I was defining my offline storage for the data, basically I said PouchDB and I give it a name, right? So if you have two different paths and you want to sync this, but you don't want to sync that one, then probably give it different names.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one last question, I guess. Different people. No more questions? Okay, please go ahead.
Sorry for asking two questions.
Yeah, sure.
You said something important, like the .com don't update the data in the database. It's make a new data, a new row, right? Is that right?
If you don't override the same revision.
Yeah, if I didn't overwrite, he will make a new data.
Yes.
So can I make like an application who will define what data I should rewrite? Like it won't be synchronized directly after online. It will make, when it's online, it will make a new data. So after that, I can manage which data should I save and which data should I remove.
I would believe that's the idea behind revision anyway. So just a small clarification here, the data will not, the new modified data will not be a new row in the database, it will be a new revision. So for example, if you say select all data from the database, it will give you that row but with the new revision. It will not override the old revision, right? So what you would do in this case is basically define which revision layer of data you want to display. Does that answer your question? All right, I think I'm running out of time, so thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the day then. Here is